So with the news that Hughie Fury is out of the fight against Joseph Parker, it seems clear that his next opponent, Joseph Parker's next opponent on the May the 6th date that was initially scheduled for the Hughie Fury fight, will be Razvan Cojanu. Now I'm going to be completely honest, and people who watched my initial video will know this, because in that initial video after Hughie Fury pulled out, I went through the WBO top 15 and I speculated on who it would be for that list. And when we got to Razvan Cojanu, I actually made the comment, I don't even know who he is. You know, he was the only person in the list that I had quite literally never even heard of. Now, at the time, I suspected that the fight was going to be made against Andre Rudenko, and it seems clear subsequently that this guy, Cojanu, is the preferred opponent. And I don't believe at the time of recording this it's been completely confirmed, but I did have an email from Parker's promoters saying that they are officially announcing the opponent in the next day or so at a press conference. So I anticipate that we'll see this confirmed, but there's numerous media outlets already reporting that this is the matchup to be made, and as I say, it's against Razvan Cojanu. So let's have a look at him on paper. Romanian heavyweight, listed on BoxRec as the 3rd best heavyweight in Romania and the 78th best heavyweight in the world. He's had 18 fights, 16 wins with 9 KOs, 2 losses, having been stopped once. He's 30 years old, he resides in the US, 6'7.5" he's listed on BoxRec, so he's clearly a big guy. Now, of his resume, he turned pro in 2011 and lost his first fight against a guy with a losing record. Following on from that, he's put together 13 or 14 back-to-back wins. The level of opposition he's been in with is pretty low, if I'm honest. In fact, being frank, if I look at that list of opponents from his 2nd fight through to his 14th fight, I don't recognise a single one of the names. A lot of journeymen, a lot of losing records in there. In his 15th fight, he fought Donovan Dennis, where he was knocked unconscious. It was a bad knockout loss. That's the footage that I've been able to find of him. You know, there's not a lot of footage available on this guy, but the bad knockout loss to Donovan Dennis is available on YouTube. So I, like many of you, I suspect, have only been able to see, unfortunately, him getting knocked badly unconscious, as opposed to seeing, you know, a better fight or some winning footage of him, because there just doesn't seem to be much tape of him available. Coming back from that knockout loss, he then won via split decision against Grover Young. And for me, that is a very concerning piece of form, because I've seen Grover Young box several times, and he is not a guy who should be troubling a top 100 fighter in the world. But the fact that one of the judges actually picked Grover Young as winning that fight kind of gives you an indication, if that judge was even remotely accurate, what sort of level this Razvan Cojanu is. He's had 3 fights in 2016. One of them was the split decision win over Grover Young. He then scored a knockout over an opponent who was 0-3, and then scored a knockout of an opponent who was 7-1. I've done a bit more research on him. Understand he's had 300 amateur fights. Understand he's been sparring fairly extensively with Joseph Parker, so the two guys will know each other, and that may potentially you know, have some impact on how the fight plays out. These guys are going to be very familiar with each other's styles. They're going to be familiar with strengths and weaknesses, etc. So, you know, that could potentially have some effect here. So, look, clearly this is a very disappointing fight. This is not the opponent that I would have wanted, that you would have wanted, that Joseph Parker would have wanted, that Duco Events would have wanted. It's a very disappointing set of circumstances. This is a guy who is nowhere near the heavyweight top 50. I'm unclear whether he's actually got a top 100 win on his resume. Very clear that he doesn't have a top 50 win on his resume, and he is literally stepping up from beating guys like Grover Young via split decision and beating guys who are 0-3 to fighting Joseph Parker, who's the WBO world champion. It's not the fight that any of us would have wanted, and it's actually very disappointing that the WBO has sought to include this guy in their top 15 list, because we wouldn't have to sit and we wouldn't have to watch this fight if they hadn't made that decision. He's managed to get that ranking, I believe, because he actually went and took a fight in China for a China zone fight that was sanctioned by the WBO. So that's how he's managed to work his way into the rankings. But it's very disappointing. You know, there's so many good heavyweights out there. I do a top 30 list on this channel, and you know, there's so many names who would make for a more competitive, more entertaining fight against Joseph Parker, that it's a shame we have to sit and watch Razvan Cojanu. Having said all of that, whilst this is an extremely disappointing matchup, the amount of blame we can put on Parker and Duco Events and Team Parker for me is very low. You know, really, really low. The fight still hasn't been announced. Today's date is the 25th of April. So these guys are intending to be squaring off in about 10 days. They've had to find a very late notice opponent, and they've had to find an opponent out of the WBO top 15 list. And let's be real, that top 15 list isn't actually a legit top 15 list, as in it doesn't give 15 credible opponents, because Hughie Fury's one of them, so he's out. 5 or 6 of the names on there already have fights scheduled, so realistically they're out. And there's a number of other reasons that various opponents couldn't be picked. For example, you know, I heard a lot of people talking about Dominic Breazeale being a potential matchup. But as I understand it, Dominic Breazeale has 1 or 2 medical issues following on from the fight with Izuru Gonu, and he needs more time out of the ring before that fight would be allowed to take place. So, you know, what I'm getting at is, whilst theoretically they had 15 opponents to choose from, when you actually break it down and when you actually work out who's realistic, there's very few options out there for Team Parker. The other thing, and this was a point made on Twitter, I think by Kevin Barry's son, Kevin Barry being the trainer of Joseph Parker, is they've spent 10-week camp training for specifically a tall guy who moves. So they want something to replicate that style, because that's what they've been training for. And I guess in Cojanu, one of his strengths is that he is at least a tall guy, and the few clips I've seen of him suggest that he's a very big, heavy-set man. So up against a guy who's 6'7½", up against a guy with that sort of size, at least Parker's going to get a bit more top experience against, you know, a guy who you know, has the dimensions of some of the giants in today's heavyweight division. You know, clearly if Parker wants to go on and have big unification fights, he's going to be coming up against guys like the Furies, coming up against guys like Anthony Joshua, Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder. So as much experience as he can get against tall guys is beneficial. Also, and this is an unclear situation at present, but it may well be that the Furies get to keep their mandatory position as they're blaming it on injury and get that fight rescheduled. So if Joseph Parker is forced to fight Hughie Fury again next time out, perhaps the fact that he's had a fight recently against another tall guy is another benefit. You know, Cojanu's also 30. He's not one of these over-the-hill heavyweights. He's got that amateur background, etc. So, you know, there are silver linings to the cloud, but the cloud nevertheless is fairly threatening in the sense that this is not the fight that any of us really wanted to see. And it's hard because Cojanu may be a decent fighter. You know, you can't really tell from someone's BoxRec profile how good or not they actually are. He may be better than build, but realistically on paper he reads so terribly, and there's so little footage of him. And you know, I follow heavyweight boxing avidly. I'd never even heard of the guy. So the truth is, we don't really know anything that we can judge this guy on other than his BoxRec, which is pretty dire stuff. We've seen Joseph Parker in against tall guys before, the likes of Dimitrenko, the likes of Daniel Martz earlier on in his career. You'd have to assume he's probably going to try and take care of this guy in similar fashion, especially given the fact that he's sparred with him, so probably knows, you know, any threats that he poses. He probably knows any weaknesses in his game, and you know, he's probably very familiar with him as an opponent, so will know exactly what he wants to do and won't be overly tentative about doing it. So that's a fight that we've got coming up for us May 6th. I'm pleased that Parker's still fighting. I'm pleased that his team aren't allowing him to become inactive, and to be fair to them, they've done a very good job of keeping him active throughout his career. But you know, it is a shame that out of that WBO top 15 list, they picked a name who none of us have heard of. And, you know, that may have been the only possible opponent to get to fly out to New Zealand for the money in you know, a week and a half notice. But, you know, nevertheless, it is a disappointing result. It's not a good fight. But I guess what can you do given the circumstances? Frustrating times for boxing fans. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Particularly interested to hear from anyone who's seen Cojanu fight before, either in the pros and the amateurs. Someone who can maybe give a bit more input than I've been able to, stylistically, how he'll match up with Joseph Parker and any strengths and weaknesses he may have. If you've enjoyed the video and appreciate the content, do take the time to click the thumbs up button, which helps get visibility to the channel. And if you haven't done so before, please take the time to press subscribe. You can also share this on your social media, which would help me out. And my social media details are in the comment in the description below. You've got a link to my Facebook, and you can follow me on Twitter @BoxingGossip. As always, appreciate you guys choosing to tune in. Thanks for watching.